Should we taxpayers spend $400 million to seismically upgrade the Capitol building? And of course, this is on top of the millions and millions of dollars that were spent not all that long ago to do some major extravagant remodeling. And where do these figures come from? Where has this estimate that has been talked about for quite some time, where does it come from? Who came up with it? Welcome to People, Places, and Politics. I'm Patty Milne. We are going to talk today on our show about some of these exorbitant, extreme costs for Capitol buildings, Capitol construction, remodeling, and many, many projects right here in the Salem community that have huge, huge price tags. But do we really, really need to spend so much money to make these buildings functional, sound, and last for a long time? My guest today is Gene Pfeifer. And Gene, in his own words, calls himself, I borrowed these from your own information, a realistic citizen, and boy, don't we need that in this kind of a discussion, a 47-year design build specialist, and also an active citizen. And I know that Gene is very, very active and shares his knowledge and his expertise on many, many projects, particularly going back not so long ago when I was a Marion County Commissioner and we needed help. We needed this community expertise to make a decision of what to do when we had to evacuate Courthouse Square because it was not sound and functional. And Gene served on that committee. There were some subcommittees of community members, and Gene, you served on the Technical Advisory Committee. And Gene was very, very persistent in a number of discussions. And through his persistent research, we did end up saving in the neighborhood of $30 million because of this kind of community involvement. So we're going to talk with Gene, who also, let me share, has a tremendous background over the last 25 or more years as a community activist and concerned citizen. Gene has owned and operated 10 construction and development companies since 1968. He is president of a 55-year design build construction company, and of course understands employees and employee issues and serving the customers. Since 1969, Gene has served as president, chairman, council, or a board member on 18 or so different civic and charitable organizations, and that includes the Silverton City Council, and since going back to the 1970s, and then also serving on the Silverton School Budget Committee for over 25 years. So Gene knows about government budgets and construction costs. And I also want to share, as you listen to Gene share his ideas and his knowledge and his expertise, his goal in all of his endeavors is to get decisions and projects accomplished promptly in a fiscally responsible manner and with the input of volunteer experience of the community members. So, perfect person to have with me today to talk about these projects that the cost of it's just eye-popping. You just gasp at what these estimates are. So Gene, why don't we begin with the Capitol and this $400 million cost to do this seismic upgrade. And of course, I can't resist saying that why are we spending so much money on the Capitol after millions and millions of dollars were spent to do this remodeling that was really over the top in many people's opinion? $400 million that could be going to seismically upgrade many of these schools where our children are day in and day out, and could be victims if and when the big one comes. So,
correct.
Go ahead, Gene.
Thank you, Patty. The figures actually from the committee that's with the legislative branch are actually right now at $337 million. That's what's quoted. That comes from Marina Cresswell. She's the project manager. And unfortunately, the figures come from her alone. There is supposedly a design-build relationship between some contractual group in construction and the design group. They've already been given and spent most of, I think it was $34 million just to design preliminary work. So to me, that in itself is scary. I think they've spent 75% of that, and we don't have anything to see for it. The mistake is that they've gone ahead with all of this without funding. Now, the figure of $400 million comes from many of us, including people who are in the knowledge and working with the legislative branch, that we believe it's going to go to $400 million or exceed that. The problem with what they're proposing is they want to dig out 10 feet below the current building and put this huge concrete structure and then a new concrete structure underneath the building, and then put these isolators in there that are made of lead and rubber. And so that's supposedly going to make up for this. But if we have a 9-point event, a seismic event, I talked to the engineer who worked on the project in the 1993 Scotts Mills earthquake. They spent about $10 million fixing the rotunda with some rebar and concrete. Well, that's fixed, but everything else isn't. That was all they got done. But I talked to him, and he said, and it was my opinion before I got his concurrence, that if there was a 9-point, it may reduce the shake down to a possible 6, but if we don't take care of the shell that's above, which is terracotta tile, which is a very poor construction material. It was very inexpensive at the time we built the Capitol as it exists. And right now we're trying to be touchy-feely about the Senate chamber and the legislative chamber and not ruin the architecture. Well, we have to do something to make it stable. So if we're going to spend that kind of money, we're looking at the Cascadia subduction. It may not happen. We're talking about averages that it comes every 300 or 350 years. The possibility is that could be 200 years from now. So we're spending money when we have so many other needs. If we looked at the building itself for replacement, it's about, in the area, I don't have the exact number because I'm still waiting for those plans from a request I made 3 weeks ago. It's around 400 to 450,000 square feet. If we multiplied $500 a square foot to replace it, would be about $225 million. So here we're overspending money to do something that we're using politics to talk about rather than reality. And we could fix it, according to discussions I've had with other engineers, potentially for 40 or 50 million, and just make it so people can get out safely.
Now that wouldn't, talk about the difference between get out safely and do the, whether it's 370 million or 400 million, and I know we can talk a little bit more some of those details later, but what's the difference between everyone can get out safely versus everything, all the problems would be addressed?
Well, the theory right now is they want to do a seismic remediation that will save the architecture of the building. The focus has been the architecture of the building in my mind rather than the people. We have still set aside those areas that we're not putting the kind of fix in that's above this part that's supposedly stable. All of this is of different densities, different shapes. They're even creating anomalies between part of the building where they're not putting this underneath. So there's a real big problem with it. If it was a new building and they put the whole thing on that and everything was seismically correct, that would then save people as well. So we're looking at spending that kind of money, whereas we could just take the solid construction that it is now, I forget what they call it, but it's the solid concrete that's there, and reinforce that concrete, and go up into terracotta and reinforce that. Then we make it so that we can reasonably feel confident that if we have an earthquake that's starting or whatever, that people can get out. I think that we should be focused on that right now, rather than trying to save a building that probably will not be saved unless we do it thoroughly. And if we did that, then probably the cost will be exceeding the $400 million.
And so then the discussion of build a new Capitol at a lesser cost comes into play.
Well, yes, we're not going to do that today. We're not going to tear down the building if it's
No.
going to stand there. We have many buildings, of course, in Salem and throughout Oregon that probably won't make it through, but some buildings, they have been made well. And just as in the Courthouse Square, it's a very sound building now, and it was logically and factually fixed, and so we know it's a safe building now. It's one of the safest we've got in the valley, or maybe is in Portland, and compared to Portland.
So there are three options. One is to, actually there could be more than three, but the ones you're talking about right now, you can fix it so people can at least get out of the building safely.
Correct.
You can address just people exiting the building without people getting buried in as things crumble. Or you could fix every problem so that people could actually be safe in the building if there were this major earthquake.
We need to make it so that people can get out. A part of the plan that they're looking at now does include improving the exiting system. That's something that's been a problem since the very beginning. I mean, we should have been focused on that long before. We don't even have knobs in there that comply with ADA. We need to have it so that people can get in and get out. But we need to focus on that exiting problem and take care of the shell of the building that we have, spend the money on it, and it's much better to be spending about 10%. And then putting that money in other things. Right now, in my mind, it's just a big political thing. It's being used to express why we should be doing this. And of course, we found out that we didn't have complete accord in the legislative in the last session. So they need to know this. I don't think right now they do. And the thing that hasn't been emphasized, that all these numbers came from this one person rather than from the builder saying we did a comprehensive budget and we now know that is what the costs will be. And then start finalizing these plans. Here we are drawing all these plans, and now we're saying, oh, we got all these plans almost drawn, now we're going to drop this, and what a shame. It's a shame that we spent the money in the first place.
That's the real shame. So the individual you've talked about, I'm sorry, I forgot her name already, she got these numbers from whom or where?
Well, she's been gathering different factors herself, but and I can't, because I didn't interview that part of her so much, but I do not believe that she has been in the field type of construction expert. She is a project manager. Project manager gathers all the assemblies of the building, makes them work on a schedule. In my background, I've got hands-on everything, and I've done the project management, and I've done all the budgeting, so I know all of these things, how they go together. That's what I did at the Courthouse Square. Nobody could believe that one could do an estimate just based on these preliminary plans, but to me it was just a matter of doing things the way you do it.
So there was a committee that has spent in the neighborhood of $34 million.
I think about 75% of that at this time.
So several millions of dollars have already been spent. Who was on the committee, and what? And I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I know you've done a lot of research. If you don't have the answer to it, that's fine. But it's a question we all need to know. If that kind of money has been spent, and these numbers have no credibility, who's on the committee? Is there some credibility to this estimate that is being used?
I don't know that I don't feel there's credibility with the estimate that was used. I was in an hour session in one of the senator's offices where she came, she presented it to, and I don't know if I should say who all was there, but I listened carefully, I took notes, I asked definitive questions, and I don't think that she understands all of that and what are the contingencies and all these things that go into it. All I know that, and I don't think that Peter Courtney was the committee, but he was the one that was pushing this so hard and couldn't get consensus even with members of his group. So I think we had an overemphasis on something that was supposedly politically correct, and rather than whether it be society correct. Society correct is we need to be taking care of so many problems that we have right now that we are spending not enough money on, and other things we're spending way too much money on.
Well, that's for sure. There are limited dollars, and there are many, many needs, and from just the short discussion we're having right now, they're far, far away from having any clear direction. It's a lot of money regardless, and it may not even be convincing to spend the $40 million to just be sure that people can get out of the building.
Patty, let me drop back a few years. When I really started noticing this stuff was before the Courthouse Square. It was the remodeling of the ODOT building on the Capitol Mall. That was stated to be about $65 million, and it didn't say the size of the building, and they were going to create new space in the private sector in the meantime that they could lease while they move the people on. I thought, well, that's interesting, and that's good that we can have the private sector get some income out of this. And I turned the page. Wait a minute, I turned back. What does this say? How big is this building? I found out with a friend in Salem and took measurements myself that the building was 157,000 square feet. Ultimately, over $70 million was spent in the process. That's $450 a square foot. That was enough money to have built two new buildings of that same character. According to our state building codes division, they have a document they produce every February that talks about the average cost statewide. And I've talked to the Salem people, and they said the costs in there were even higher than what they figured they should be, and we had been using even 5-6 years ago, or maybe a little longer, we were using about 75% of those costs. So these are in excess of that, and we spent that kind of money. And that when you talk about waste in buildings, so we get a focus on something, it gets caught up in the politics. They talked the building needed to be seismically upgraded. One very credible long-term seasoned, I'll call them, engineer in town says that project should have been done for under $10 million. So, and we wouldn't have had to move people out and all these other things that happen. So these are we need an oversight of this that's going on.
And it should be a citizen oversight committee, just similar to what we did with Courthouse Square.
It should be somebody that
Balances
doesn't
and
have,
checks.
there should not be somebody who has politics in it. It should be just somebody, as a matter of factly, looking at, is this fiscally correct? Is it structurally capable? Is it economically feasible?
And what kind of, have you been in the ODOT building since it's been
Well,
worked on?
what I did was, I guess I was in, but I only did was one thing that I was concerned about. I looked at the windows that were there, and I thought that I was right. I don't believe that any of the old windows were changed to insulated windows, yet they tote the project as being a great, sustainable green project. They changed the kind of roofing to a build-up mineral aggregate roof. And now they flush the toilets with the rainwater, and they're saying this is wonderful. We spent $70 million, and we didn't even change the windows out. And one of the goals was to have a more efficient building. So the original ideas were we needed to fix the elevators, we needed to have better air conditioning, and there were some structural problems that they wanted to improve. And we ended up with one great big redecorating project. That's what I feel.
Rainwater in the toilets.
Flushes the
Well,
toilet.
that's wonderful. That's just wonderful. But again, who pays for all of this? The taxpayers.
That's right.
The taxpayers. And so the taxpayers, everyday citizens who have the knowledge and the expertise, really need to be involved in these projects. Let's talk a little bit about the North Campus, and of course that's the area near the state hospital there.
Right.
Give us some background on what's happening. What's the issue with the North Campus?
Well, the North Campus is what was left over. There's a South Campus and the North Campus of the Oregon State Hospital, and it was deemed that the buildings were falling apart and everything on the south side. They came up with this great plan to put new buildings in and to remodel some. Even in that, I feel, I'm digressing for a moment, that probably it was about $175 million too much was spent on that South Campus. And I've had people telling me about problems with it, and I could go in great detail even about poor accessible into the core of the building, even for firefighting or whatever. But that left this property on the north side vacant. It's about 48 acres. The buildings are 504,000 square feet. A lot of buildings there. They're concrete structures. They're reasonably built. They do need some work for seismic remediation, but not a lot. And in terms of historic buildings, you don't have to fix everything 100%. So this was offered by Department of Administrative Services as being surplus property, and they found out by their own numbers that it was very difficult to sell it because the asbestos and other problems. They've got tunnels with asbestos in them. If someone was going to go in there and create what the city of Salem was wanting to push, and which they're currently pushing, was to have a $100 million development go in there, which means you tear down all the buildings, allegedly, except for the dome building. And that cost is equal to the value. And the ending appraisal that they had was $1,665,000. $1,655,000 for a 48 acre property and that many square feet, 504,000 square feet. So politics, there was a offer made, and they said, hey, this thing has legs, and thought something could happen, but politics got entered into it. And pretty soon they're talking about, well, gee, we don't know what's going to happen. We need to take another look at it. Everything stopped. And instead of something that could move forward and be supported that was truly sustainable, to use these buildings with a minor cost to improve them and have them available, then was wiped out by this thing that said, well, maybe we need to tear these buildings down. Let's get funding from the new legislative hearings. And $8 million was set as the value to request. It got buried in a $100 million request by DAS, Department of Administrative Services, and that got passed. Well, now the thing's sitting there open to be demolished, and some are saying, and I'm going to say that the city of Salem has an interest in it because they see new taxes coming from this, but the anomaly is that the neighborhood is not going to support the new things that normally would go there. It is not a good place to put a, like a big shopping center or something. It's not that kind of setting. It's a park-like setting, and it could stay that way. And more minor improvements, more like $30 million could be spent on some nice congregate housing or some apartments or some townhouses or some other thing, but keep away from Park Street and keep away from D Street and make it so that it's a very friendly neighborhood. So this is now back in heading down the path to destruction, and it shouldn't be. And I can talk some more about uses.
And again, how much money has already, remind the audience, how much money has already been set aside, how much money has been spent, and what has been actually accomplished?
Oh, well, that's interesting too. The budget that they've been spending every year is about $500,000 just to maintain the heat and supposedly take care of the buildings. Well, they've been taking care of the grounds, mowing it and stuff, but in terms of the buildings, I went to all the buildings, and most of them, I should say some of them, you'd go into the door and you'd actually be blown out from the door because there's so much heat in the building from the heating plant. Nobody's taken care of that. It should be at 55 degrees or something. Here's the heat blowing at 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And so here we're wasting money. And then we had broken pipes where we had this freeze about 3 years ago. The pipes have not been fixed. We've got sprinkling systems that are not hooked up. So, and then I don't know what all kind of money that DAS has spent otherwise, just with people administrating this back and forth. I get frustrated, so I'm going to maybe mock them unfairly, but passing the file back and forth and then not making any decisions, and then finally says, oh, let's do this, whatever. It needs to have some sensibility in it, and it doesn't. So I don't know that I got the real number as to what's been sent, but I do know that well, it was several million was appropriated for a period of time, but that got used up, and then they had to extend it again. So
this most recent, you mentioned $8 million figure that was allocated within some other budgets.
Yes.
Part of the overall
part of the overall request from Department of Administrative Services.
And was that this last session?
This last session.
So now there are $8 million more set aside just for this property.
8.2, I think it is. Well, I sent white paper that I broke it down pretty well to explain it to them, that if they spent that money, and I feel that it'll end up spending more like 12, because the numbers that I had compared to, I'm not going to say his last name, but Eric with the DAS, agreed to our numbers basically, that if they spend that money, any supposed new value of sale is going to get wiped out, and they're going to go in the hole because they had an offer that exceeded, it was in the positive by 4, and the other method, if they do it, they're going to go into the negative by 4, so that's a spread of $8 million. They're going to drop $8 million cash to move forward with something that is not friendly to the neighborhood, not friendly to incubator or some affordable housing for the elderly, or something, or for a satellite,
Something compatible, though, within that neighborhood.
Yes, well, it's compatible because we don't have something that gets destroyed. The buildings that are bigger are more away from, they're more closer to town, closer to Center Street, and we're staying away from Park and from 25th. It just makes a better setting. And it would make a wonderful spot, too, for a, I know Western was looking for this type of thing, and still is, and they believe in sustainable. This would be a great satellite location for Western Oregon for some nursing space. So anyway, it's very usable. There's a swimming pool there. There's a gymnasium there. There's all kinds of good things.
And are those facilities salvageable?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. My goodness. So we've talked about two major projects so far. Excuse me. And there are some others. And also, as I'm watching the clock here, this right now, this discussion we're having is the first of a two-part session on these this government spending and these, pardon the expression, bureaucratic debacles with our taxpayer dollars. We've covered just two and only touched the surface. So as this program now is winding down, we are going to come back and have the follow-up discussion on this. And what I'd like to get into in that discussion is talking about, you're using the word quite often in your discussion here, sustainable, and we need to define that. Also green and all these other, and what else, what other costs, politics are making these projects so horrifically expensive, and probably way too expensive to do something that would be compatible with the neighborhood, such as in this North Campus discussion, and also benefit the public at large. So we will close this discussion and come back to talk about sustainable, green, and also I know you also want to talk about the issue of water, and we will do that in our next session.